suggested that since I'm not being introduced, maybe I should say something so at least you feel that somebody who knows something is standing in front of you. And I don't need to say much more. There's my introduction there. I was a senior staff scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists until 2003 for renewable energy and energy policy. And before that, I had been a professor at Stanford University and at San Jose State University. And I chose to go into renewable energy full time in my teaching and my work 35 years ago. So I've been in it for a while. I had an architectural degree before I got my PhD in physics, so I've been very involved in building design as well, which I like. But through Union of Concerned Scientists, became very involved in policy. So what we're going to do now, that's enough of an introduction. Okay. I've been past president of American Solar Energy Society, International Solar Energy Society, all sorts of things. So now you can trust what I have to say. We don't think the Earth should heat up any more than 2 degrees centigrade. It really appears in our models that things will start happening drastically if we're warmer than 2 degrees centigrade. And we're 1 degree now. We're halfway there. And 2 degrees centigrade warm up means 450 parts per million. Well, people are sort of settling on 550, 450, 550. It's going to be extremely difficult goals, but we start asking ourselves, how do we tackle those goals? And we look at causes of climate change, and we find, as we well know, that energy is indeed the primary contribution. So even if this were not an energy conference, if I were just talking to you about climate change, its dangers, and what we can do to meet it, I'd start talking about energy policy. It's where we are. Okay? So this is out of some publications I've had, and I'll just show you one of them in a moment. But what we've tried to determine is, all right, at what percent, the left-hand side, is at what percent of the world's energy use has to start coming from clean, non-carbon energy sources in order to limit the growth, ultimately, to 550 parts per million of CO2. Now, there have been all sorts of work around that as to different policies. That's what all those little colored things. I did superimpose the U.S. policy. There it is. So you realize that the United States has no policy. It's not doing anything whatsoever to contribute to setting a limit. So let's look at this picture again, and let's look at it this way and try to make it easier. The green line says, well, it's a little hard by 2010 to get going as fast as we want to. So let's consider 10% renewables by 2010 and 20% by 2020, and then get up to 50% by 2050. And that is the target that's been adopted by the European Union now, that's been adopted by a number of states and cities, because it's so easy. The 10, 20, 50 target, 10% by 2010, 20% by 2020, 50% 2050. The reason I'm showing it to you is when you see targets like that, people will say you're just drawing these numbers out of the hat. No, you're not. That is the target. The 10, 20, 50 are the targets that can stabilize us at least fairly close to where we think we need to stabilize. Those are real numbers. Okay? And the circles, the most aggressive ones, came out of my own work that I did on a paper that was paid for by the European Union. And I'm going to show you in the next slides why I'm confident that we can meet those aggressive targets. This was the paper called Transitioning to a Renewable Energy Future. It has its own web page, a little hard to see in the bottom, but it's just whitepaper.ises.org, whitepaper.ises.org. You find it in Chinese, Arabic, Spanish, French, German, and whatever you might like. Try English. All right? And this is what comes out of that paper and some others that I've published this year. And that is, all right, in order to turn that corner for the 10, 20, 50% usage pattern, what does that mean for our energy usage between now and 2100? The black is the fossil fuel use. It says we've got to turn that corner. If nature doesn't turn the corner for us, as Richard is suggesting it may do, we ourselves have to have turned that corner by 2025 or 2030. So now you begin to see why everybody's targeting toward 2030. That also is not a number drawn from the hat. It's a real policy number that's necessary to accomplish this stabilization. And all the colored things you see represent the amount of energy that renewable energy will have to contribute if the world keeps growing on its use of energy. And we assumed a 1.2% annual rate of growth for the world on this, because we don't believe we can level it yet, even though there's no question efficiency, as Richard and Stephen and everyone point out, is the starting point. And so we have to ask ourselves realistically, Can renewable energy be developed fast enough to meet all of those colored lines that you see there and really power a transition even if energy use continues to grow? So here come the practical opportunities with renewable energy. I'm going to dwell first on electricity because it's the easiest to deal with here and has the greatest number of resources. Just to remind you that all we really want to do with electricity, to make electricity, is to turn that generator you see on the right-hand side. That's all you're trying to do. Everything else you do is to spin that generator. So the way we do it with fossil fuels or nuclear, of course, is you boil water, you make it steam, the steam turns the turbine, and the turbine turns the generator. So then we ask ourselves, all right, can we do this without burning fossil fuels? Can we look for natural ways, natural sources of steam or ways to make it? Well, we've got one just north of San Francisco, the world's largest geothermal power station. The fellow Channel 2 interviewed me a little bit before. I hadn't realized. He's rather new to Channel 2 and he didn't know about this. The amount of electricity that's created by the geysers geothermal power plants just north of San Francisco is equal to the electricity that the whole city of San Francisco uses. Now, it goes into PG&E grid. It doesn't all come to San Francisco. But the point is, that already is a local renewable energy resource which by itself is equivalent to the demand of our major city out here. It begins to suggest that we've got large opportunities, and indeed if we make a map of it, they're the geothermal resources. People will look at that and say, well, obviously, geothermal's in the west, it's not really going to help provide for the energy of the entire country. But if you look at that resource, the technical potential is 14 times greater than all of our proven and unproven coal reserves. So what you begin to see as you look at these renewable energy resources is the potential is gigantic. Well, let's look on. You can do what they're doing dramatically in Europe with combined heat and power, making steam by burning biomass energy crops, in particular chipped wood, for example. And our president even mentioned in his State of the Union address, he still can't pronounce nuclear, but he did pronounce switchgrass correctly, and I was amazed he mentioned that. Yes, indeed, we're paying farmers right now not to grow crops on lands that's erodible, so they're growing switchgrass to keep the land from eroding. You can harvest the switchgrass and dry it and throw it into your coal-fired generators. You reduce the sulfur, you reduce the energy content, reduce the coal content, and clean everything up. There are a lot of things we can do with that. Or farmers can grow biomass hybrid energy crops. This happens to be in northern Minnesota. You can plant these crops. These trees take about 10 years to grow. You cut them about 6 feet above the ground. Another 8 years, you got another tree out of the same stump. You cut it. Another 8 years, another tree out of the same stump. You can get a 40-year crop out of one stump. And it has farmers doing what they know how to do on land that we would not otherwise use for growing energy, for growing food. So we ask ourselves, assuming we don't want to displace any food land, what resource potential do we have using biomass crops? And the technical potential is that we could create 70% of the U.S. electricity just from the residues on the fields and from the residues in the forests and so on. Again, a huge amount. Another way to do it, as we just saw out here, there was a nice demonstration actually of a parabolic trough collector which was concentrating on the black pipe that he had out here. You can make bigger ones and concentrate more, and you can go to high temperature fluid. Then the fluid goes to water, flashes the water to steam, and makes electricity just the way we know how to do it. The world's biggest and longest operating solar thermal plant is in Southern California. Its capacity is 1/3 the size of a nuclear power plant. It's been going for 20 years, and there's a magic thing about it. Right in the middle of it is a gas-fired power plant. The contract with Southern California Edison is that starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, SCE wants their full amount of electricity, whether the sun is shining or not, and they want it flat all the way till 7 o'clock at night. And so what they do is they turn on the gas-fired power plant. As the sun comes up, you back down the gas, and the sun takes over. As the sun goes down, you go back up with the gas, and you have a hybrid marriage between solar energy and between gas. And the hybrid saves 3/4 of the gas. 20 years experience has now shown us that the gas only needs to give us 25% of the energy, and the sun will do 75%. When people talk about the transition as well, we'll stop using fossil fuels and we'll start using renewables, and that's not what we're going to do. We use fossil fuels to help power the transition, to help make it more attractive, to level our intermittent resources. There needs to be a marriage between gas to reduce the demand on gas, since we're really not going to be able to meet it, and to increase the value of the solar. And here's a wonderful example. And what part of the U.S. would that work very well? That's in the southwestern U.S., where it's very bright and clear. But you can see there's a good bit of opportunity in the rest of the U.S. Or we can skip all that stuff. Skip all that making the steam. Figure out some way just to turn that generator. And a very nice way is to put those wind blades up in front of it and let them turn, and it turns the generator, and that's not a new technology. And this is not DOE's new R&D program either. This has been around for a while. We used it no laughs out of that. That's all right. Previously we used it in order to grind grain and things like that, but now we use it to make electricity. And I don't know how many people realize that California pioneered the world wind industry when Jerry Brown was governor, and basically said, let's go for it. And at the beginning it was a tax dodge, but it got it going, and Denmark picked it up and started making better machines, and all the rest has been history. But we pioneered the world wind industry. That has come a long way. The coal industry likes to say, the renewable advocates are going to say that we're going to be taking tens of thousands of acres of land out of farming to put the wind turbines in. They actually still write that. They forgot to tell the farmers. So the farmers didn't know that they could go on farming the land, and so they went on farming the land, even though they had the wind turbines. And in fact, what we have learned, and it was alluded to earlier, is having wind, the annual payments from your wind turbine leases on your land doubles your farm income. It's been a marvelous boon to rural America to help people stay on the farm, because when you have a bad crop year, that the wind turbines can carry you financially and enable you to stay on the farm. They've been a wonderful boon. So, if you want to get a sense how big they were, this is about the size of a tower for a million watt unit. But the average, the worldwide average now is 1.5 million watts per, which will give you enough electricity for about 1,500 families. The only way we knew how to show you how big that is for a bunch of us to stand by one blade of a 1.5 megawatt unit, so you get some sense of the size of them. They're huge, but they've been worked out beautifully. All right. Where's the wind resource in the U.S.? It's what we call the Saudi Arabia of wind, which comes down in the red area through the Dakotas and down into Kansas and Nebraska and all down in that area. And indeed, I tend to speak a lot in Canada, and it's sort of fun when I show this slide, because I said I really don't believe that wind starts right at the 48th parallel. I do believe something's going on above that. And what is the technical potential for that? Here, when the Union of Concerned Scientists did this, we said it's 40 times the annual electricity use of the United States. That number has now gone way, way up, possibly up to 400 times the electricity use of the United States. It's huge. Every resource we look at is huge. And so now we put them all together, and what do we find? Every state in the Union has in abundance at least one of these major renewable energy resources, and some lucky ones have all four, like California, Nevada, Oregon, and Hawaii. You've got all four. How do you then start powering the renewable energy transition? You start by looking at the resource you have here and tapping into what you have in greatest abundance. So what do we have in San Francisco area nearby? We've got geothermal. We've got tidal current coming in underneath the Golden Gate. Very unusual situation, but quite available for tapping energy. We've got solar energy. We've got biomass energy. We have wind energy, but we're not going to be putting turbines along that beautiful seacoast right there. And so we're going to have other reasons for not tapping into all of our resources. But what you find out is wherever you are, you start developing that resource which you have in greatest abundance. There are going to be then regional interconnections. We already have the Western Regional Grid, which connects us to other sources. And the main thing to keep in mind is not only does every state have at least one, and most states have two or more, but that the abundance of the renewable resources is far more than any state or our nation could possibly need to use. Technically feasible, totally feasible to repower the United States. So then we begin to ask the question I asked earlier with the model, can we develop this fast enough in order to have the renewable energy transition? We look at wind energy capacity growing worldwide, the world's fastest growing renewable energy resource. The amount installed in the world right now is over 60,000 megawatts, the nameplate rating equivalent to 60 nuclear plants. What's happening to the cost? As you install more and more things, the costs come down and down and down. It looks like in the 2005, maybe you'd begin to cross over, and indeed, it's happening. The lucky wind energy customers of Xcel Energy out of Denver, Colorado will be paying $10 less on average per month than customers who buy electricity from natural gas. That's where we are now, today, with the economics of this fabulous resource. The cost of gas is going up, the cost of wind is going down, and for the people who've already bought into it, we're there. All right? But there's still more. The relative potential for solar energy collection is huge. If you say that Arizona has got 100% the potential, how about those poor areas like Seattle, Washington? It's got 60% as much as Arizona. In fact, the worst areas in the United States have got 60%, 50 to 60% as much solar radiation over the year as the best areas. It only differs by a factor of 2. Well, if we could barely tap into it down in Arizona, then the rest wouldn't be economic, but that's not the case at all. It turns out that solar energy falling on the earth is a uniform resource for all practical purposes for all of the states in the U.S. We have solar homes in Alaska, for example. So we can skip those generation steps and do what people have been doing in the demonstrations out here and the talks we've had. Let the sunshine make the electricity directly. As you probably know, the sun falls on the solar cell. It is just the physics of the solar cell that it takes the light and electricity comes out of the other end and nothing wears out. If you make the cells correctly, and we're learning how to do that, and protect them from the weather 100 years from now, they should work as well as they do today. All right? Well, how about the availability of that? The total area required for a PV power plant at today's, when we did this little thing, 100 miles square in southern Nevada, at 10% efficiency with solar cells, produces electricity equal to the needs of the entire United States. Now, you're not going to do it that way. Instead, each state needs on the average 1/50th of that to be energy independent. And you start looking at the roofs of the buildings and you say, my goodness sakes, we have the land. Okay. And so we let our building surfaces be our solar electric, thanks, Kimya, be our solar electric land for a variety of reasons. This I like to show because it was done 20 years ago. It's not in Arizona, it's in sunny Washington, D.C. And it's a 300,000 watt system. It's 20 years old. People keep asking how long will these things work. Well, we keep showing our older and older ones so you can see. But it's the perfect utility customer, because when it is hot and the air conditioners go on in Washington, D.C., and the utilities get hit with that very expensive peak that they get hit with, and they have to turn on the peaking, the gas-fired peaking generators, not for this building. This building runs its own air conditioners. It's the perfect utility customer. Well, we saw before, and Stephen talked about it too, in particular, that how complicated it is. It isn't just the generation of energy, it's getting the energy to our end users, to our homes and buildings. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do away with everything you see there and just pay attention to where we want to use the energy and have that left over? And of course, as we've heard, that's exactly what we're doing. The top home being the Boston Edison home, the bottom home being one I just put in while I sat up here, Stephen Heckeroth's barn, where he is using the electricity not just for his house but also for his car. So indeed, what you need to realize is we're doing away with all of that. And when we do the economics, it's not just how much electricity can you save back to the generation plant. It's how much of all of everything else can you save. And it has another big feature. Oh, this is in Japan. And you saw this slide before, that they're developing the solar home certainly at a very fast pace. And indeed, back to our question, can we develop these resources fast enough to meet our needs? The answer is yes now with wind, and it's yes now with PV. Both are growing on a pace to meet those colored curves that we showed you earlier that we have to meet. Well, that's terribly exciting. But let's show something else. As we begin to do away with all of that system, let's look at something that actually happened. Remember the blackout in August of 2004? Remarkable pictures of New York City. People were going out in the street and looking at the stars and showing constellations to their kids and so on, because they hadn't seen them. Well, what happened was this. There was a heat wave, a big electrical demand, and what I generically call ZAP. It's not exactly a scientific term, but you get the idea. It actually only took out one or two lines, but then it led to a cascading effect. And the cascading effect happened because everything was interconnected through this massive system. And so it took out this massive system. Now we look at what we have. There's New York City with no lights on. There's the transmission line. There's all the feeder lines going in. Everything's off. Let's ask hypothetically, what would it take, or what would it have taken if we had put photovoltaics on buildings scattered through that region that went out? The first thing we saw by looking at satellite photographs is that it was during the daytime in the entire region, all of the states in the U.S. and the area in southern Canada that went out were in the bright sunshine when this happened. So we ask ourselves, might it have been prevented with PV such that if the sun comes out, maybe New York City could have stayed up? And so Richard Perez at Albany, at SUNY Albany, did the calculations and said, yes, indeed, if we had had 300 megawatts of distributed generation through the buildings, through that multi-state region, it would never have happened. Well, we have to ask ourselves, what will it take then so we can have that kind of security in the United States? Well, 300 megawatts is what Japan installed last year on its houses. 300 megawatts is what Japan is installing this year in 1 year in its houses. 300 megawatts is what Germany is installing this year in 1 year on its buildings. So what it tells us is the two nations that are really leading the world right now, having taken seriously using PV on buildings, are now well along towards stabilizing their grids and providing the kind of security. We have a long way to go. But it does show you an actual fact. The numbers we need are attainable numbers and are being realistically attained today. So we see it all over the Bay Area. We're certainly doing our very best. Powerlight's contributed a great deal to it. We've got some private people. I have a former student of mine who owns Ace Hardware in Palo Alto. Just went back and put PV on the roof and gets 90% of his energy. We're finding them all over the place. Chabot Space and Science Museum, so kids can link what they're seeing in the museum with nature providing for that educational value. The grocery store that Barbara and I walked to down the street is this Whole Foods store, and it's the only one that's got PV on the roof. And the interesting thing about this is it drives a DC, direct current lighting system. This is not net meter. And all of the lights in this Whole Food are DC operated by DC ballasts. The result of that is when you have a power outage, all the lights stay on. And so when we had a blackout in Berkeley, Barbara and I went running down to the store. We thought it was really great. And there we stood looking through the glass doors while they waved at us and said, sorry, we can't open the glass doors, AC. They were powered by AC. So there was a wonderful cartoon series for years called Unclear in the Concept. And this is a good example of it. Make it so the doors can open and then it'll work. But anyway, it was quite remarkable to see that. Okay? We're getting government buildings and how important that is. We've seen that we need it for the security of our governments. And very, very large systems, giant systems, million-watt systems going up now around in our own counties. Here we are in San Francisco, of course, with the Moscone Center. And the remarkable thing about the Moscone Center, as we heard a little bit earlier, is it revenue neutral. Is that they went in with one contract to the Moscone Center for energy efficiency conversion. And San Francisco fronts the money for the energy efficiency conversion and putting the PV on the roof. And the energy savings from the efficiency savings will buy the PV. At the end of 10 years, San Francisco has all of its money back and it recycles the money. So this begins to show how communities can begin to recycle their money if you look at a picture a little larger than just installing a PV system. Look at the operation of the buildings. Look at opportunities for saving money through efficiency where you should start anyway. Okay? PV parking lots becoming ubiquitous right now. A building that I designed, I'll show a picture in a few minutes, at De Anza College in Cupertino. And this is also De Anza College, that as long as our building was going up, why not convert the parking garage and put 240,000 watts of PV in the parking garage as well. So there's a community college, using community college funds that's already starting some of the conversion. If you want to know what is the potential of PV on roofs in the Bay Area, here's an example I always love to use. It's in Orinda, California, 4,500 square foot home, 12 kilowatts. It's a lot of PV. But that covers 3/4 of the south side of the roof, which is what you see there, which is only 3/8 of the roof, right? So 3/8 of the roof in Orinda is enough to provide all the electricity needs for the house and both electric cars. Now, his wife had their EV1 out at the time, so I sneaked mine in to take the picture, but nevertheless, all right, 3/8 of a roof in the Bay Area is enough to provide electricity for a house and 2 electric cars. And Steve Heckeroth and I both take issue from the statement we heard earlier that it's going to be very difficult for solar to replace transportation. It depends how you look at it. We get serious on the very things that Steve was talking about with electric cars, electric plug-in hybrids, and get that PV up on our roof. We're going to find solar contributing in a major way to our transportation needs. Okay? But we're talking about buildings. Let's look at buildings. Because U.S. energy consumption, buildings use almost half of the energy in the United States are in buildings. My goodness, we should pay attention to that. And when you look at CO2 emissions, it's even greater. Transportation and industry both contribute a great deal to our CO2. Industry around 22%, transportation around 26%, buildings 50%. And it's the most unsung part, or a misunderstood part of all of our conversion, is we keep talking about gadgets and widgets, cars, and generators and things like that, without realizing that the users, like buildings, are the most accessible, the easiest, the least expensive, the quickest conversion opportunities that we have. So we begin to look at simple opportunities. Passive solar heating, you're smart enough to face your house toward the south, you can save 40% of your energy needs, which is 40% of your natural gas use, anywhere around these areas. Piece of cake. Doesn't cost anything at all. Just pay attention to where you put your windows. All right? We heard a little bit before about solar water heating, which used to be important and needs to become important again. And I combined the two. The first building I designed in this area was the new library for San Jose State University. It was in 1976. And since Sim van der Rijn was the state architect, he gave me a long leash. And I said, I'm going to design the first state building that has no furnace and no air conditioner. I'm going to show you can do it. So we did. And so there it is. It was the first building integrated solar, but that's 5,000 square feet of solar water heating in the wall to provide for the heating of the building. We didn't have much affordable by way of electricity then. And the natural climate in the Bay Area is so wonderful, you can cool it with nighttime ventilation. And so I went up and I thought, aha, I have now shown, 30 years ago now, I've shown the way, and this is going to blossom. It didn't blossom because it's such a different way of doing things. But for goodness sake, if you wonder about the potential, there it is. So we have other ways of using solar. On commercial buildings, it gets pretty hot to let the sun shine into offices. But you can diffuse it and you can shade it and bring it in as daylight. And a world-important example built 20 years ago was Lockheed Missiles in Space in Sunnyvale. And Lockheed's so famous because they throw the sun, the daylight, 90 feet. And daylighting design is my own architectural specialty. And the way you do it is you throw it up on the ceiling, and there it is. And the reason you throw it up on the ceiling is then it comes down into the cubicles. So you don't have to see the windows to have daylighting. And Lockheed has been saving 70% of their energy because of the daylighting design. And it's a beautiful building. And Lockheed calculated that it cost $2.5 million extra on a $40 million building to do all this stuff that you saw. And they figured they'd get their cost payback would be 5 years of energy savings, $500,000 a year. And then they found the people who were working in this new building stayed at work. And their rate of absenteeism went down by 15% when they moved people into the building. And Lockheed said the productivity benefits just paid for everything, paid the whole $2.5 million. And then the next year, Lockheed competed for a $1.5 billion defense contract. And they're able to have lower overhead and fewer labor hours for people working in this building. They won the contract. And they said, we won the contract because of the architecture of the building. And they said the profit from the contract bought the whole building in the second year. And that was the beginning of what we now have got research all over the United States and in Europe showing. That the real economic benefits of these things that we can do to what we call green buildings and sustainable buildings are in the benefits to the users, the productivity benefits, go way, way beyond these simple-minded calculations of energy payback. Nevertheless, they're very pretty. If you want to make a new library like they just did in Reno, why not make a pretty one? They have air conditioning in Reno. They didn't want to have to air condition this building. So they just brought daylight in, made it open so the air could circulate. We'll cool it at nighttime. It's an incredibly beautiful library. We have learned that doing our energy efficient buildings produces beautiful buildings. While daylighting in schools is important, I like to show this because the Place of the Sun School that has no windows, which was in Arizona, and it was really built without windows. And there was research that was done by Lisa Heshong over in the 1950s. We built an awful lot of schools that did have windows. And she did research about the performance of the kids in the schools in relationship to the daylighting resource that they had. And the benefits of daylighting on students, measured on 20,100 students, improved test scores 15 to 25% faster learning rate by kids who are in daylit rooms, or in proximity to windows, or in proximity to daylight. I was the keynote speaker to the New York School Board Authority about a year ago, and there were 1,000 people in the audience. And I showed them this and a lot more about schools. And I said, now that you know that daylight is the key to enhancing the educational value of the schools that you're going to build, not one of you will go out here and quibble about a little extra cost, right? Because if you don't put daylight in the schools, for 50 years, you yourself are responsible for building a building that you know will be substandard in educational potential. And then they asked the question, I'm going to answer it for you. Research of the best green buildings in the United States now has demonstrated that the average extra cost is 2%. It varies from negative to 10%. The average extra cost is 2% for all of these wonderful things we're showing you. Okay? So yesterday's design approach to buildings was to shield them from the environment. Mies van der Rohe started that in 1957 in New York City with the Seagram building. Ever since, people said, that's great, reflect the sun out, turn on the air conditioner, turn on the heaters, turn on the lights, we got it now. Don't do that anymore. Today's design approach is to utilize all of the available surfaces. This happens to be in Germany, but it's a multifamily apartment. On the whole right-hand side there, you see a photovoltaic wall because the sun is lower up there, and it provides the electricity for the building. The reason for doing that is it leaves the roof free where they have the solar water heating system on the roof. The wall makes electricity, the roof makes the hot water, and then you have the access for the daylight and the natural ventilation through everything else. We use all the building surfaces now. And we can accomplish remarkable things, including, as Steve said earlier, showed a picture of zero net energy houses. Houses that give back to society at the end of the year as much energy as they need. This particular one that he showed before was done in Boston 10 years ago. It's got passive solar direct gain heating. It's got passive solar sun space. It's got solar water heating for radiant heating floors, solar electric. There you are. And as he also showed us, you can do it in Maine. And if you just tap in to look at solarhouse.com, Paul Lord will keep you up with how his house is doing. Again, what I'm trying to show you is the technical feasibility of everything that we're talking about is absolutely established in every climate that we have. That's why I show you pictures of these in different places. The last picture I'll show you is the most recent design I did, and this is and I have to say it's co-designed with Sim van der Rijn. Putting it together in Cupertino, California, the Kirsch Center for Environmental Studies. This is the first LEED certified building we did, it's LEED Gold. And this is a digital model of it. And it shows lots of interesting things with passive solar, good shading, daylighting, and a roof covered with PV. There's the building on the dedication that we had just about a month ago, before the PV was on the roof. And I was away when I was responsible for the energy efficiency, the PV, the daylighting, things of that sort. And Barbara and I were away when they finished the building and they started using it. We came back early in September and I was terribly eager to see the finished product. I went into it, the students were in the classrooms, the faculty were in the offices, people were walking in the hallways, and there wasn't a single electric light on in the entire building. That's what we know how to do. We know how to do that. What benefit do we get from that? Well, Title 24 is a pretty stringent energy standard for the state. We can beat that easily by 40 to 50%. For economic reasons, we only beat it by 40% with this building, and then we turn on the PV, and the PV now is only 30 kilowatts. Originally, it's going to be 100 kilowatts. We didn't get the funding for the whole system. It's actually 36 kilowatts DC. But even with that PV system, we're saving 60% of the energy of that building now, compared to what it would have been otherwise. This is what we know how to do. This is what we can afford to do. This is what we are doing. There's no reason we should ever do anything other than that. So we now reached a critical crossing on the way toward a responsible energy future. This is a real road crossing. It's in Aspen as you come in from the airport. Hi, Barbara. And what it says is if we keep meeting our growing energy demands, or keep having growing energy demands, I haven't talked enough about efficiency really, by building more power plants, we're sending the economy down cemetery lane. There's no question of that. We're passing the consequences of today's energy policy to our children to solve. We're passing the consequences of the CO2 in the atmosphere, of the toxic substances we're putting in our environmental systems and our water, and of course of the nuclear, of the nuclear waste that we have for the surface. That's totally unethical. So we're obligated to start the renewable energy transition now, and let's just look for a second, just for a second. Do we have the public support? We start by listening to the people. All of the polls show that Democrats and Republicans virtually equally favor renewables first, efficiency second, natural gas third, and don't like the other things. I tell politicians of whatever political stripe they are, if you have an aggressive energy efficiency and renewables policy, you will get more votes. It's not political and Democrat until you get to Washington, D.C., where it is politicized, but nowhere else. Well, we have to operate where it's not politicized, which means right here, in our communities and in our counties, and really in our states. We have a Republican governor saying some remarkable things these days regarding renewable energy. What cities can do. February 16, 2005, the Kyoto Protocol took effect in 141 countries. March 30, 2005, 10 mayors representing more than 3 million Americans joined together to invite cities from across the country. Since the U.S. wouldn't join the protocol, they said, okay, we will, as cities. All right? On June 13, 2005, the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement was passed unanimously by the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Cities signing the agreement agree to strive to meet or beat the Kyoto Protocol targets. Where are they now? As of February 2nd of this month, 202 U.S. mayors had adopted the goals of the Kyoto Protocol. So there it is, distributed throughout the United States. So as you're looking for things for Stinson Beach to do, one of the questions to ask is, has Stinson Beach joined the Mayor's Protocol? And we took a look very carefully, and I'm sorry, I don't see Stinson Beach in that list. Therefore, there is one of your challenges. Okay? What else can cities do? Community aggregation, oh my, we can't underscore that enough. Take control of your own energy destiny. Set your own goals for CO2 reduction and accelerated goals for the use of solar and other renewable energies. You can do that through community aggregation. Don't wait for others. You know the magnitude of your resource, do it yourself. What can people do? You ask them how much would they like to spend. Just finishing off on the economics of PV that we just heard some about before. A poll that was taken in California just last year showed that 7% of the people didn't want to pay more than $500 to put PV on their roofs. 32% of the respondents said they'd pay between $500 and $2,500. That's 1/3 of the people who responded. So they pay between $500 and $2,500. We just saw an economic analysis that said, okay, you can put maybe a $14,000 system on your roof and not pay more than this. But that's all right, because 1/3 of the people also said they'd pay between $2,500 and $5,000, and 1/5 of the respondents said, oh, we'll pay between $5,000 and $15,000. 1/5 of the respondents, 1/5 of the homeowners in California saying, yes, we're ready to put our money out there. My goodness, we have the resource. There's the source right there. Okay? How about beginning, since they just are repassing the Patriot Act, let's play with that a little bit. Let's define a new kind of patriotism. We might even call it maybe a new Patriot Act. Reduce the international tensions, the environmental pollution, and the dangers from global warming from energy production and use, and provide jobs, energy resource security, energy cost stability, ecological sustainability, and a clean environment for our children and their children from the inexhaustible renewable energy resources on our own lands. How about that? There have been some wonderful editorials in the New York Times about patriotism and energy. It is the most patriotic thing that we can do is to save energy and to go into energy efficiency. The most patriotic thing that we can do is to develop our own alternative renewable energy base in this country. That's a real definition of what patriotism is supposed to do in strengthening a country. It is in our hands, remarkably so. But we can do better than by passing the sun into their hands. And we really can pull this off. Thank you, Steve Heckeroth. 40 years of oil left. 5.5 billion years of sunshine left. Choose wisely. Thank you.
Financial sponsors of this event, which include Sharp Solar at the booth over here. They were a gold sponsor, $1,000. We have Solar Depot, which was a silver sponsor by providing the solar power. And we have several other companies, bronze sponsors, including Cooperative Community Energy, Evra. We have Green Light Solar, Marine Solar, Solarcraft. And so we're really pleased by the support we've gotten from solar providers that are basically operating throughout Marin County, throughout the Bay Area. We have plenty of choices if you want to go solar.
Hot steam from the cracks in the earth, the renewable energy of trees, doing a lot more with a lot less, cleaning up the air streams.